I'm really excited about having this conference here. UX has been something that has been kind of bubbling in Tampa a long time, but hasn't hit critical mass. So when I see a group of people out here for this topic, to grasp a particular aspect of what I consider the larger umbrella of user experience in working through an IA design, I'm very excited to see you all here and to see you all wanting to learn more and wanting to take that back to your businesses. So I'm very thankful for Amy and Krista and all the rest of this group to bring this to the Tampa Bay area. And so thanks so much for coming. We're going to talk now about usability testing. And I apologize. For some reason this morning I woke up, I have a little bit of a froggy throat, so I apologize. I'll probably have to sip of water every once in a while. We're not going to cover usability testing in tons of detail in the time we have, but I want to leave you with a lot of basic understandings of what usability testing should be, the foundation pieces of it, and I want you to have enough tools to go out and know what to search for when you want to bring usability testing into your work. How many people have been involved in a usability test, either conducted one? Oh, okay. A lot of people are already there. So you probably have a lot more advanced questions than I'm probably going to cover in here, but we'll leave a lot of time at the end for Q&A. So a very quick overview of what usability testing is. A very, move this just a little bit. We're going to talk a little bit about the benefits of usability testing. We're going to talk about how to plan a usability test. We're going to specifically think about the goals for usability testing IA. They're not going to be exactly the same as the goals for testing other aspects of the user experience, so we're going to talk about that a little bit. We're going to touch on some common approaches and tools that you can use to test information architecture. And we're going to talk a little bit about the philosophy of reporting test results. I'm not going to go into a lot of statistical analysis and that type of work here, not in the time that we have. So when I was thinking about usability testing, I came across this quote from Donna Spencer that I really like. Some of you may already know this since you've been involved in tests, but I think she makes a very good point about how we approach usability testing. Talking about, it's not about checking whether users can use your website. That question is what you want to know. That's about what you want to come away with. It's about checking whether the website lets them do what they need to do. That puts the emphasis on them, what they want, what they need, what kinds of experiences they want to get out of interacting with the tools that you're putting together. It's not always a website. Any kind of experience that you're designing, whether it's a physical experience in the world, we're seeing a lot of discussion in the industry about service design, which is starting to take some of that complexity and try to figure out how do we design for that. We had a question about how do you design for the virtual world? It's not so much anymore just the virtual world versus the physical world, but it's a continuum that people are having to face. That's adding a lot of complexity to how we do these processes. It's bringing a lot of complexity to how we think about evaluating a user experience. And I think at the heart of it, we're also talking a lot about empathy in the industry. I see a lot of discussions. Indy Young just came out with a book that's available in Rosenfeld Media. That is a great giveaway. That library, oh my goodness. I have about half of their published books already, but I wouldn't mind a full library myself. So as we think about the empathy with users and what they need to do, we have a lot of complexity that we're interacting with. So I'm talking about fundamentals, but I think that there's some things beyond that. When we talk about architecting happiness, and we talk also about what that means in a larger context and what that means over time, keeping grounded in focusing on the user is very important because they're very complex these days. It's no longer, I just want to do a task. Well, we started out that way very much, but it's no longer that. So it is a process of seeing users interact with a product. That's a very objective activity. Some people will tell you they like something. They will tell you that they enjoy it. They will tell you that it's easy to use, but then you see them use it and they really struggle. So it eliminates the opportunity for misinformation. And it eliminates the chance to miss some subtleties in their thinking that they may not be cognizant of to tell you. So Seth talked about getting to know the users and asking questions and finding out that initial user research, and that's absolutely where you should start on any of this. But when you really want to see them without the biases that they bring or the assumptions that they bring, a lot of people just kind of subsume certain steps in their minds. Testing will get you to that information. Testing is about evaluating against criteria, and that criteria is very complex, and it's going to be very specific to your product. We'll talk a little bit about goals for IA testing in a very general sense, but there'll be very specific things that you'll want to ask about your IA. And specifically, it's important to think of this as criteria and goals as opposed to pass-fail conditions. The origins of usability testing is in behavioral cognitive research. And so these are hypotheses in many respects. These are what you expect to find, but it's not a yes-no answer. It's not an absolute. And there are very few conditions for complex projects that are aimed at large populations that are going to be 100% successful 100% of the time with 100% of your users. It's just not how it works. People aren't that uniform. We're not ISO compliant. We don't come out the same way no matter how we start. So we definitely want to set good criteria. That is, I'm going to spend a lot of time on that particular point. The other thing that you should think about is testing should be done early and done often. It is something that should be a continuous process throughout the design and development phases. It is something that continues to keep the user present in those phases. So you don't just ask them on the front end and then you're done and then you take that body of knowledge and carry it through. You continue to engage them and you continue to understand what their perspective is and get their feedback on what you're developing and designing. It looks at the user's needs and it looks at their expectations. And expectations is where we often find happiness. We talk about architecting happiness. You can evaluate that subjective quality. And there are some tools to make that subjective quality more objective in trying to make sure that you understand whether or not you've provided a happy experience for people. So the benefits of IA testing, a lot of you already probably know this. Again, you raised your hands, you've been doing testing. It's very much to learn early on whether you're on the right path to solving the problem that the users have, to delivering the experience that they need, to creating a structure with your IA that will help them accomplish what they want to do. And so it will tell you where gaps and miscues occur. I'm very precise about the use of the word miscues here. I don't use errors when I talk about test results. Errors implies an actor, and the only actor here is the user. That is not where the fault lies. Your design may mislead, misinform, guide the users astray, and that's a miscue. So I want to recognize that we need to be evaluating our designs. It's kind of a cliche. We're testing the design, we're not testing you. It's kind of every single script you've ever seen about how to start a usability test starts with that, but it's very real, and I carry that all the way through when I report it to my teams. These are the miscues. This is where our design got it wrong. So we also want to know the positives. Where did we get it right? You don't want to keep designing if you got it right. A lot of times people don't look at the positives. A lot of times I think a lot of people go into usability testing thinking they have to find something wrong. And sometimes all you get is validation. And when you accept that validation is good, it's not a bad thing. You kind of say, oh, hey, I did learn something when I talked to them initially. I did get the criteria right. I did internalize that into my design process and brought it out to the fore. So it's nice when you can do it. It's not always going to happen. You're always going to find something, little nuances, but little nuances are way better than big showstoppers. If you're doing formative usability testing as opposed to summative, you may also be looking for alternatives to your design. With IA, specifically things like different ways of grouping information, different terminology that you might use, different sorts of groupings and relationships and patterns with the structure of your information, and other terminology that's needed. All of this gets deeper into the heads of the users in ways that they can't articulate a lot of times. I tell people that, tell me how you, just describe in words how you tie your shoe. A lot of people, they can't describe that activity. It's a very simple one, we could show it, but we can't describe it. We leave out steps. We just shortcut it because we're so intimately familiar with doing that. I mean, we learn this, when we're 4 or 5? We've been doing it all of our lives. We don't think about it. So we just say, oh, we do this. And then you realize there's like 5, 6 other steps that we never think about. So by watching them use the product, we actually get to those 4 or 5 other steps. So it also has some intrinsic benefits that have to do with your team management. One is the inclusion of users helps with the change management process. So a lot of times we go into situations, particularly with internal systems, where we don't think about the user in an empathetic way. Particularly with internal projects, intranets, internally built tools. I've done a lot of work on software for processing applications in insurance, and the stakeholders bring you in and they say, well, they want to work here, they have to use our software. I've seen dozens of systems die horrible, horrible deaths because that was never tailored to the users. Users will kill bad software. They will do it in the market, they will do it even in internal systems. And if you engage them in the process, you can get buy-in that you wouldn't get any other way. You can also get buy-in from your teams. Now, it used to be a cliche that developers didn't really care much about the wetware. It was the hardest part of the problem. You know, they didn't want to solve for that. But I've never really found too many developers not want to see their product be successful. But they have different ideas of success. Engineers think fundamentally differently. And I was brought into a test some years ago where the design team was really struggling because the engineers were saying, we want to use certain patterns over because we want to support consistency and learning, and so it'd be easy. And the designers are saying, you're not getting the grasp of when consistency is valuable. And so I came into the test, one particular area was with the use of a wizard. There was an initial setup wizard that was something like 18 screens. It was a very complex system. It was a very complex wizard, very valuable for the setup of this tool. But the designers or the developers wanted to reuse that exact same experience for every single edit. And the designers are like, wait, that's going to drive them nuts. So until we took it to the users, we couldn't answer the question. It was just us versus them. So one particular session, we had test scripts that had to make different changes. People went through the test or through the wizard the first time, all the way through to set up the system. Then they made a couple changes. The second time the guy hit it, saw this wizard pop up, he goes, I was like, what's the big sigh for? He says, I have to go through every single screen again. This ended the argument with the developers. So you bring the team along with you. You put the user's mental models into your whole team by doing this. So when you're planning a usability test, the most important thing, and I mentioned it before, I said I'm harping on it, is the why. Why are you talking to your users? Every time you talk to the users, you are spending their goodwill. If you think about that cost for a usability test, you're taking their time, you're asking, they don't care about this as much as you do, even if it's a tool they have to use. They don't care about it the way you do. So you're asking a favor of them. So you need to know exactly what you need to learn from them. You need to know who you need to talk to, ideally. And I will say you can grade a little on a curve on who you need to talk to. I do ascribe to the Steve Krug model of recruit liberally, grade on a curve. It's better to talk to one person at all outside of the development and design teams than nobody at all. But ideally, you want to get to the people who are going to actually use that particular feature of your product or the product as a whole. You need to know what you're testing. Very rarely are we working, particularly in complex systems, are we working on systems that you can go end to end on every single test. It's just too big. You're taking too much of their time. Typical usability session is about an hour. Sometimes you get less than that. Sometimes you can only really target down to one particular feature, particularly if you're doing more hallway type of testing or crowd testing. You have to determine the methods you're going to use, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the 3 that are most frequently used in testing IA. And you're going to look at the where and the when of the schedule. And those are probably the most straightforward, but I will say where is often virtual. I do a lot of remote testing. So I screen share with participants. We're on a conference call, and that's how I get my data. So it doesn't have to take them into a lab. It doesn't have to take them into special circumstances. I don't have the cost of going out to them. So it's a very valuable way to do a lot of testing rapidly. particularly if you're doing an agile style project where you have maybe an iterative cycle of testing. Maybe you're testing every other week as features are developed and you're keeping pace with the sprints. Being able to do remote testing is very valuable. Oops. So when you think about the goals for testing an IA, for evaluating an IA, certainly evaluating that terminology, making sure that your language is what the users use and it's in sync with that. Making sure that the relationships that you've established between concepts make sense to users, that you want to make sure that those groupings and relationships are accurate. You want to make sure that if you're in the formative stages, that you're discovering alternatives, that you're making sure, this is particularly important when you're thinking about designing a taxonomy that's going to inform, say, a search engine. You want to make sure that you are getting synonyms and other alternate spellings or other concepts that you may not have thought about because you're focused on one particular area. When you're looking at navigation and navigating through this body of information, you want to see whether those flows make sense. Do they match how users want to do their work? You also are looking at satisfaction and the perception of success. Not so much success. You can see someone get to the right answer. But do they know they're at the right answer? Do they feel good about being at the right answer, the right place in the test? You're not actually measuring whether they're being able to be successful. You're very much wanting to know how they feel about it at this point. And there are ways to do that. There are tools like product reaction cards that I think is a Microsoft developed tool. You can find out about that. There's an entry on Wikipedia, but I will also recommend Carol Barnum's presentations on that. So if you go out to SlideShare and search for Carol Barnum, you can find her presentations on product reaction cards. I can't remember off the top of my head what the title of her presentation is, but if you're interested, I can find it and get an email to you on it. You can evaluate that subjective information in a very objective way. So as you think about this, you've done testing, what kinds of things would you test for when evaluating an IA? Anybody have thoughts? What kind of goals would you have? What would you want to know about how your users interact with IA? Yes? Accessibility?
Yeah, my name again is David. Yeah, accessibility, 1, 2, and 3. If a customer is interested in something that I'm providing, and they're at the point of actually trying to find me and engage me in commerce to meet that need, then they've already heard about me and they're already aware of their own need. So at this point, in terms of user interface, for instance, a web portal, can they actually find what it is they're looking for? And as importantly, and I think as a value add, potentially maybe I'm not what they're looking for, and they came across me by happenstance, but I'm able to get them, to what they are looking for. So if I'm not the right thing, then they find that out right away, rather than having to go through a lot of trouble. And if I am what they're looking for, how easy is it for them to tell me what they need and get me to get it to them? I mean, it's really nothing new. It's just a different medium.
Right. Well, absolutely. And I think you make a good point that that empathy, even with the people who aren't the people you're targeting, I think is very important because you gain respect. Actually, sometimes telling someone, no, I can't help you, is as valuable a touch point as saying, yeah, hey, let me help you, let me sell you my product or whatever it is. Anybody else who have a thought over here? And then over here. I'm gonna make you run, sorry.
So this may seem really weird, but I usually test for frustration levels. Because
Not at all weird.
emotionally we disconnect, so you can lose a user so fast if they give up on trying. You might be testing for all these things that you want to catch on metrics, but if someone gets frustrated at the first step because you've designed poorly, you want to find out how you're going to get through that situation with them. So
Absolutely, that's a great point. And when you're thinking about architecting happiness, and we had one over here, architecting happiness, you have to find out where you fail to deliver happiness. So that's absolutely a great point. And usability testing is one of the few places that you can start to find that early enough to make corrections before they're screaming on Twitter about what an awful project you have, right?
I would also say you have to just make sure they actually know the purpose of your site, because a lot of times you have a purpose and intent, and if you think, oh, people know what we're here for, and you don't actually test, do people understand why they're here, what the point of this is, then either if you have good accessibility or not, or if they're frustrated or not, you don't even know because they don't understand, why am I here?
Absolutely, absolutely, and it's a good point that make sure it's not just about wayfinding, but it's about actually making sure you're on the right way to begin with, right? So absolutely that. If one over here, and that'll be our last one, and we'll have time for Q&A at the end. So I'm definitely gonna.
I just think one more information about your users. Say if you could simplify the signing in process, sign in with Facebook, sign in with Twitter, or are they the type of customer who will never in their lives use Facebook to connect with you?
Right. Absolutely. Thinking security is a big issue within UX because we know we're memorizing bazillions of passwords stinks. It's just not a good experience. There's actually Dana Chisnell writes a lot about. She has a number of blog posts out there about how we don't think empathetically about security. We do the easy thing from a security perspective. We require 12 characters and they have to be, this mix of types of characters and that sort of thing. But we don't think about the empathy, and we don't always think about, do I really need to secure this in this way? So I think security is a big issue. And so there's also a point with security when you think about information grouping. How much do I put outside the security to entice you to care to go through that step, whether it's giving me your Facebook credentials or not? And then how much do I put behind that? So as you think about, things on either side of that. So these are all great things. Thank you so much for that. And we will talk about maybe a little bit more in the QA part of it. So I just wanted to show this quick structure. This is something that I use for all intents and purposes as a executive summary to my test plans usually. I have the test target. I may have multiple test targets, so I may replicate this table. I define who I'm talking to, and I'm very specific about that. I tie that to the personas that I've created for my user research. I tie that to very detailed qualities of that user if there are differentiations in my audience. The method I'm using, the materials, where I'm doing it, when I'm doing it, of course, and the status of where I am. Again, this is very much a living document. My plans are a living document. This is also really important when I'm doing agile style of testing, and I may have an overarching plan and then individual plans below that. But again, most importantly in this is this test target, I want to learn these things. This is why I'm taking your time as a user to come in. So, just some quick comment approaches. Some of you may have seen these things. Card sort is probably, I tend to think of card sort and tree navigation testing as kind of bookends, but that's not actually accurate. You can actually use them at different stages. But the card sort in particular is going to evaluate somewhat different things. And I will say that at the front end, if you have an open test, it's very generative. You're actually open means that they can come up with their own terminology, their own categorizations. And so what you're seeing here is in the picture is an open card sort. The cards themselves have prepared words. The team put those together. But you see sticky notes and a pen up top. So the user is actually defining those categories. They're not defining structure. They're not defining all the way you navigate down to it, but they're saying, these things group logically to me. They establish that relationship, and then if it's open or hybrid, they establish the terminology. If you want to use it as an evaluative tool, you actually run a closed card sort, and you provide them with the categories and the cards, and allow them to assemble those. So you make sure that your terminology in the front end's right. It depends a little bit on your users and where you are in the process about which one you use. I will say that I also have not only used terms that I'm going to put up there, but concepts. I've used on cards, I've put very extended concepts, not necessarily put the terminology, and then another place I'll work on the terminology for that concept, but I'll say, here's these ideas that I want to group, and then tell me what you would call them. Tree navigation, generally you have a structure. It is looking at that hierarchy. It's an evaluation of findability. Does your terminology lead them to the right place? Does it inform them correctly along their journey? Jared Spool talks about the scent of information. Do you have a good scent of information to get people to where they want to do their work? It doesn't have any content. It often it loses the context at lower levels as they navigate through what is essentially an outline. And you're seeing something where they've clicked in several times. So they have a couple of different levels they've gone through, but they are all seeing the terminology that's going to be exposed at that point. It's a really great way to really pick apart the language. The other way I test is with a navigation prototype. Very much more familiar, I think, than for most people. You're used to putting a prototype in front of someone. What's important about when I distinguish navigation prototype, and I won't say that I see this term used a whole lot, but it's how I've described it, is that you strip out all the content. You have a lot more rich context. Things don't go away in the way that they do for a tree test, but you really don't give a lot of details about the interactions on this page, just straight navigation and this concepts group there. And so people can navigate. This was actually created in Axure, and it's clickable. I have obviously not clickable here, but you can actually navigate all the way through this site and see what's on each page. It also isn't intended to constrain interaction design. So this is not saying that all these elements have to be placed this way on the page. I need to put them somewhere to have the concept to test, but it doesn't try to hamstring the interaction designers who may be looking at those interactions a little more refined. So those are the three methods. I will say the first two, the big player in the market for online testing is Optimal Workshop. You can actually go and demo their software, and you can take it as a participant so you can see what that experience is like, and you can actually see the results. I have those. I could walk you through those, but I wanted to focus on these concepts first. We'll see if you want to see those things, then I can open it up at the QA session. But I encourage you to just go out and play yourself, because that's the best way to learn about it. So in reporting test results, as I said, I'm not going into deep analysis, but I want to give you some philosophy about what to do with your test results. And the first thing goes back to the goals. Make sure you answer the questions the team had. You set the goals for a reason. You wanted to learn these things for a reason. Make sure you address every point that you said you were testing for. You may have found other things, and that's great, but don't lose sight of what the goal is. One of the things about these kinds of studies is that they can be kind of amorphous in some ways, especially in the formative stage. It's easy to go down rabbit holes. Keeping your goals, setting your goals at the front end, very sure what you want to learn, and then keeping those in mind as you're reporting the data and you're looking at what you've collected will keep you from going down a rabbit hole and getting fascinated with something that was interesting, but it's not really serving the user as a way that you think it might. Tailor how you report it. There are organizations where a big honkin' report is very important, and that's a all capitals term, big honking report. I think it was trademarked by Carol Barnum. And for the most part, people are saying, we don't want to do big honking reports. No one reads them. But in certain organizations, particularly larger organizations where you have extended stakeholders, you have an executive sponsor, they're not going to read the report. They just want to know the report exists. So a great executive summary, but understand that you have to still create that document. But in more informal settings, you may just have a debriefing session after the usability testing with the team. Agile, definitely, you don't want to have the big honking report. You may have a list of bullets saying, problem, here's my recommendation. And those should be very actionable. Focus in on the things that people can actually change. Steve Krug, actually, when he talks about it, talks about having just like 3 things, the top 3 things, no more than that. There might be 5 critical things, but the top 3. He really narrows it down. I don't go quite that draconian, but I do say that you really need to say, what can we accomplish? There's a certain pragmatism in design. A perfect design never delivers, so it's not perfect. It's not a perfect experience. So we really need to be pragmatic about it. What can we really change, and what do we need to defer? So focus on the significant and recognize the limits of your data. Don't try to do statistical analysis with a sample of 3. Don't lie with your data. I mean, Disraeli said it best: lies, damn lies, and statistics. Don't let yourself fall into that trap. And it's easy. You see a lot of people reporting percentages. What's your sample size? 5 people. That's not 75%. I'm sorry, it's not. It's 4 of 5. It's not going to be, don't falsely weight the statistical significance. Also acknowledge the limitations. So if you had to go out and the only person you could get was Bob down the hall in accounting to look at your site, acknowledge that. Acknowledge that you've grading on the curve, and recognize that Bob probably knows a little bit more about the product because he's in your company, even if he's not on your design team. So recognize those kinds of limitations so that you're honest with your data. And recognize, this gets also to staying out of rabbit holes, recognizes that things that make you all excited may not necessarily be what make your user excited or necessarily matter to your users. That said, on the other side, if you see a catastrophic failure in one test, that may be all you need to know to say, we got to change that design. So it is a value judgment. So it's very much important that you understand what you're trying to accomplish and what a deal breaker would be for users. So I talked about the tools from Optimal Workshop, Optimal Sort here on the white side and TreeJack on the other. Those are 2 of the reports that you can get out of it. There are multiple types of reports. What I really love about these tools, I often don't have to do any additional analysis, really. I may have a presentation that I crib those and dump those in to talk through it. If I've done a closing questionnaire or pre-test questionnaire as part of my study with these tools, I'll do analysis on the written answers that I get. But by and large, I find with IA particularly, here as a card sort, you see the groupings, how people have clustered your information, so it kind of points to what your structure should be. The pie tree, I love that report because you can get so much rich data. It shows you the path that was expected. You actually set up and say, this is where they should end up based on my model. And they'll show you where they went. They'll tell you if they went down and back. They'll tell you if they never got there, and a lot of rich data about that. The only thing I throw out from these tools, I do not use the time on task information. They'll tell you that because it's easy to collect. But think about the context. So these are things that are typically run remotely and unmoderated. So I open this up because you send me an email link and said, we'd like to get your feedback. And I open it up and I start working on it. And my colleague comes in and asks a question. And I go answer that question. It takes me 5 minutes. I come back, I finish the test. Looks like it took me forever to complete that task. But really, I only spent 2 minutes total on it. So I tend to throw that out because I think there's too many confounds. I don't think it's trustworthy data. Actually, I tend to throw out time on task categorically in most formative usability testing because you're putting people in a test situation, high anxiety. You're putting people in a situation where they're unfamiliar with the interface you're giving them and looking over their shoulder while they're using something they don't know. No pressure here. And then you're going to measure how fast they can go through that. I don't think it's a valuable statistic most of the time. Your mileage may vary. If you're doing summative testing, you may, but I would recommend other tools for evaluating things like time on task. Something called keystroke level monitoring, KLM, is a great tool. It actually is an ergonomic study by IBM years and years ago that looked at how long it takes you to actually do certain actions. You can't go any faster than that in a design. And so those kinds of things are much more accurate tools for getting you that insight. So again, be careful with your data. I have in these slide decks some resources that you can refer to. The last 2 are specifically around IA testing. The other books are just fantastic resources about usability testing at all. So I recommend you go out and take a look at those. I will also be posting these on my own SlideShare account, so you can search for my name and find these as well as with any group SlideShare posting. So at this point, what questions might you have? I've got the hand up first over here and then over here. He beat you by half a second.
I had a question about frustration versus security. Can you talk about any kind of principles you've learned or learnings that you have or rules of thumb?
Well, first of all, it's a very good point about the difference between the frustration people have and security. People don't get frustrated when you're securing stuff they want to be secured. I go to my banking site, I want to see a couple of hurdles before you can get to my financial information. You ask me to log into a news site, why? You know, I know it's because you want to track me, but let me just put my email in or something. Don't put a big security hurdle. I can remember my email every time and you can trace me in that way. So you have to think about, what am I really securing? Is it a value proposition to the user to secure that data? So that's one thing. Another thing that you want to consider about is the degree of security. How many hurdles do you need to put into place? I worked with a client who was doing learning software for oncologists, and they had a fairly rigorous security system, and people would say, well, I came to the site, I signed up once, I forgot I signed up, because they're busy people, they don't do this all every day. It's something they have to relearn every time. And when I came back, I couldn't remember my password, so I abandoned it. They were losing people that they wanted to reach because they put up too many barriers. And I'm like, well, at the stage that they first come, do they really need to jump through that hoop in order to get to that data? At some point, they may be taking a test, and then you want to erect that hoop. So where you put that barrier, again, depends on what the information is and what the value of that information is to the user. So, and again, I do recommend going out and seeing Dana Chisnell's blog to search on Dana Chisnell UX and security. Other questions?
Okay, we only have a few seconds left.
Okay, so I have remote users, developers, and I want them to feel the empathy and understand the user experience. What's the best way of transferring that? Is it video? Is it just written stories? Or how do we transfer that emotion?
Video is awesome, but even better is to get them in the live session. So if you're doing a remote usability study, a lot of the conferencing tools will allow you to have all kinds of people looking in. You just have to set some ground rules for don't chat, don't talk, don't be seen, or find a way to hide them from the user. The user will forget they're there. You usually acknowledge and say, yeah, we have observers, but people forget they're there. And so I do say that the best thing is to actually watch them in live time. If you can't do that, highlight reel is very good if you can record the session. And failing all that, telling stories, not the data, tell the stories. Actually put a lot of quotes in, say, this is what they said about this. So kind of in a step-down approach, that's the way I would go about it. So, and we're out of time, so thank you so much. And if you have other questions that I didn't get to, please come up and ask me. I'll be around all day. Thank you.